it looks like it's time for some geekiness and some, and some Bible too. You've probably been thinking, when's this guy going to get some theme music? Well, I did inherit some from Reg, but to tell you the truth, I can't remember how to get it on there. But soon, maybe that Mannix theme I promised you. It should be a lot of fun and more original than anything else I could come up with, I'm pretty sure. A lot of interesting questions today. I hope you'll call in with some, because I believe I've actually got a way to answer them this time. I'd like to, though, before we get to the questions, to thank all the generous folks that have coughed up donations, and I must humbly acknowledge not only the thought counts, but the result as well, as I am one of these gypsy-like scholars with views so weird, no reputable institution will pay me to teach them. So, I welcome your continued support, and thank you again for your generosity. I know from experience it's easy just to ride the train without paying, and that's, of course, okay, too. You're more than welcome. I'd like to also raise a question that I'd like your reactions to. You can email me, you can call in with it, whatever. You can Skype me, as they say, but it's occurred to me to perhaps start up a second ongoing weekly program, perhaps an ongoing course of some kind, either a New Testament introduction class, or perhaps one on the Gospel of Thomas, where we could just go through it saying by saying, or maybe the book of Genesis, the first 12 chapters or so, where you get all that great mythological stuff. These are things I guess I don't need to tell you I have taught before, and it's kind of second nature to me, and it would be fun to share what little I know about it, and of course we could have questions again emailed in, called up in the chat room, whatever, and that'd be great. So let me know what you think about that. If nobody's that interested, I don't want to just rant to myself, obviously. So, but I'd probably have the time to do it, and would enjoy doing it. And so, let me know what you think. And it seems to me there might have been something else I was going to tell you about here at Free Thought Media, as we start our great etheric endeavor, trying to spread the good word of critical thought and religion all over the place. If you have not visited my website, I'd like to invite you to do that, and it is just robertmprice.mindvendor.com. That's no periods within my name, just all robertmprice.mindvendor, spelled MINDVENDOR.com. You can subscribe to my monthly essay, Zarathustra Speaks. You can keep up with places I'm going to speak and debate, and books I have coming out, and other self-promoting puffery, and you're more than welcome to do that. Let me see if we've got anything in the chat room or the questions we want to take a look at. I know we've got lots of good questions. I think I'll just start there. In fact, that will ease my considerable anxiety. I always feel like I got so many of these darn things. I got 4 pages of them backed up here. Norm from Tucson asks about glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, and I figured it would be appropriate. Well, let me just read the thing first. Do you think the gift of the Spirit, called speaking in tongues, that it is described in Acts and 1 Corinthians, is the same phenomenon as the ecstatic trance babbling we see in Pentecostal charismatic churches today? Do proponents maintain that this practice has always been performed from the day of Pentecost until this day, today? If not, then when did this odd practice first develop? If glossolalia as we know it today did not commence on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem in 33 CE, immediately following the preaching of Peter, Is there another point in history, a date, place, person, where we can say this unusual practice originated? Parenthetical note, I'm fascinated by the fact that many deconverted Christians who are now complete atheists can still perform glossolalia at will. Well, I figured it would be probably most appropriate to answer this question in glossolalia rather than intelligible speech, so here we go. Well, I guess that's enough of that. Probably some FCC rule against that, but glossolalia, speaking in tongues, actually is very old, and depending on, I guess it's kind of semantic in more ways than one, but inspired babbling speech goes back a lot older than the New Testament and in the same milieu. For instance, the oracle at Delphi, the oracle of Apollo, spoke in tongues. I'm not sure any ancient source calls it that, but it's pretty obviously the same thing, because the oracle would breathe in certain volcanic fumes in the cave, which is of course why they had it there, and she would go into a mantic, altered state of consciousness and would begin to babble, which is no criticism, right? I do not take any of the words in Norm's question to be pejorative either, to say it's ecstatic, trance, babbling, etc., this odd thing. None of that is a criticism. The whole idea is that if you're speaking in tongues, you're engaging in what is not intelligible speech. It sounds like nonsense, but it's the wisdom of God sounding like nonsense to human beings. It might be special effects, but even back with the oracle of Apollo, the notion was she would babble. It would be inspired divine speech beyond mere human speech, and then there would be a second functionary there who had the gift of interpretation, just as in 1 Corinthians. And the interpreter would somehow tune in and not translate, because they didn't think it was an earthly language, but interpret as one might interpret a dream or interpret symbols. And that's where the intelligible part would come in. And as you know, I'm sure often the oracle's replies were equivocal and could be taken a couple of different ways, and so on. Just like the prophets, the wormhole aliens on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. One of the most fascinating things about it, Cisco would go into the temple of the prophets and it'd be told something, and it wasn't patently obvious, and it was like one of the most profound things in the show. He had to figure out the meaning of it, or the advice would do him no good. I've always thought that was fascinating. And other people would take what the oracle did as a kind of a cop-out, that your general goes in there to ask about the coming battle, and the oracle says, if you go to war tomorrow, a mighty empire will fall. And of course she doesn't say which one, so her bases are covered. Well, you can be cynical or not, but she would speak in tongues and the interpreter would give you the sense of it, and that goes way back before early Christianity. There are records of what appear to be Gnostic glossolalia in some of the Nag Hammadi texts, where somebody tried to transcribe it, as linguists do today. There appear to be similar phenomena in various other religions, including American Indian religion, if I'm not mistaken, where there was no question of influence. And this has led linguists who've studied it to say we're dealing with what you might call a pseudo-language facility that anybody has. I remember seeing a Honeymooners episode where the two couples go to England and they're in Heathrow Airport and they're mystified by the accents, and some Britisher comes up to Ed Norton to ask him for directions out of Heathrow. What? And Norton can't understand what the heck he's saying, and then he says to you, I'm sorry, I can't help you, buddy. And so the Brit leaves, but then Norton walks up to another Brit and just repeats what he said. he can understand them and tells them the directions. Well, everybody can apparently do that, some better than others, and it sounds like a language, but it isn't. And sure enough, Glossolalia turns out never to be a language, but that's okay. Many Pentecostals think that they're supposed to be speaking an actual foreign language unknown to them, but I think they've made a mistake. Don't think that's what the New Testament says. I don't think even in the Pentecost story they're actually supposed to be speaking human languages. As it says in 1 Corinthians, they're speaking the tongues of angels. In fact, there is a pseudepigraphical book called the Testament of Job, which some say is a Christian book, but it isn't. I believe Russell Spitler from Fuller Seminary says that it's a Montanist book, and it could be. It's hard to date with any certainty, but it might be a pre-Christian Jewish book. It's a retelling of Job, and in it Job's daughters prophesy and sing, and it says in the Greek text that they are singing in the dialects of angels. Well, it's just like what 1 Corinthians says, and it doesn't appear to be based on 1 Corinthians, so it's a wider phenomena even in the ancient world. Again, that is not to discredit it. It's like saying, you mean communion was not invented by Christians? Well, whoever said it was. Or circumcision was not invented by Jews? Oh, no. No, the point is that these ancient communities of Christians and Jews adopted well-known religious practices, as they did with prayer, after all, right? I mean, nobody's got the copyright on that. And so glossolalia is a more widespread thing. I admit, if you're not into it and are unfamiliar with it, it seems very bizarre, but you just have to take the approach an anthropologist does and say, well, it's one more human phenomena, one more creative way of self-expression. It certainly is that. And so I am not eager to practice it nor to attend such services, but I've done it. I've attended many in the past, and it's okay by me. The practice of glossolalia throughout Christian history has been sporadic, but it does have a long pedigree. It's cropped up again and again in spiritual renewal movements and enthusiastic movements, including the Montanists and so on. You might say, well, if it were the real thing, wouldn't it have continued on regularly? Well, of course it wouldn't if you were taught that it shouldn't, and at least it was never encouraged throughout most of Christian history in an increasingly staid, kind of dull, predictable atmosphere where people didn't want prophecy and speaking in tongues. They just wanted creeds and that kind of thing. So it's no surprise that it is not exactly, every church every Sunday, but neither is it a surprise that it has cropped up again and again. An interesting thing. A lot of good books about it. Felicitas Goodman has a book called, I believe, just Speaking in Tongues, and she's an anthropologist. And the Indian woman who's a witness at the trial in the recent movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, she was based on Felicitas Goodman, who was an advisor to that movie. She's also an expert on demon possession, and I recommend her books, What About Demons and Speaking in Tongues, and any other Amazon lists. So, Speaking in Tongues, I guess you've heard about as much of it as you're gonna from me, but fascinating topic. Chuggy R. from East Yorkshire says, I'm reading Humanism, an Introduction by Jim Herrick. In it he says that the Exodus is now seen as the migration of people known as the Hyksos at a time when the dynasty of pharaohs had weakened. How does this relate to claims that there is no archaeological evidence for a large-scale migration? Well, my guess, and my knowledge of this is limited, but my guess is that that in the absence of the Exodus as described in the book of Exodus, people are now just trying to cast around and find the nearest thing to it, and that would be the migration of the Hyksos, who did take over Egypt and establish their own dynasty, and were then driven out. Maybe it sounds to me like someone is saying, well, that's about as close as we're going to get. These people were some kind of Semites. They came in and took over. And it is an old theory that the story of Joseph might be a reflection of that. But the Exodus is supposed to have happened after that, at the time of Ramses II, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence there. And again, there would be. This is not the kind of thing where it's equivocal. Recently, they thought they had discovered the whereabouts of the city of Ubar, which I think is mentioned in the Gilgamesh epic even, in Saudi Arabia, and the way they found it was to trace old caravan routes from zillions of years ago based on infrared detection. Just caravans from long ago. They could tell where they had been. Well, nothing like that is disclosed in what would have been a massive movement of population, animals, and goods. And I always say to my students, well, what do you think? Did God send the angels down with vacuum cleaners to get rid of it all? There's just no way this happened. I guess you could try to hang the hat of the Exodus on the peg of the Hyksos, which I gather is what Herrick is doing. But again, I'm not familiar with his argument, so I don't mean to criticize it. But that's what little sense I can make of it at the moment. Norm also asks when my book, The Pre-Nicene New Testament, is supposed to come out. Well, according to the good folks at Signature Books, it is supposed to be out this April, so we won't have too long to wait. And he says he's pre-ordered it at Amazon, and he says just can't wait for this translator's cut, like a director's cut of the New Testament, especially the deleted scenes cut out from the canonical release of the New Testament. And what book's going to be in it? He says the only one I've mentioned on the show so far is the Shepherd of Hermas. Well, I've gone to some trouble to pick out 27 other books that might have been in there, so there's going to be 54 altogether. I hope that works out. And some of the others are my reconstruction of the Gospel according to the Hebrews. I've never seen anyone do that before, but it's fairly easy to do since we have extensive notes from the ancients as to where that Gospel, which they had in front of them, differed from Matthew. And so it seems to me not that tough to do. So I'll have the Gospel according to the Hebrews. I'll have a reconstruction of the Gospel of Marcy in there. And again, we have extensive statements from the ancients before they burned it as to what was and wasn't in it. And there'll be the Gospel of Thomas, my own version. There'll be the Gospel of Peter, which is just a passion narrative. There was more to it than that, but we have only fragments. There'll be the infancy Gospel of Matthew, called the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, but I don't call it that because that implies the canonical Gospel of Matthew is by the real Matthew, whatever that means. So I just call it the infancy Gospel of Matthew. There I've taken one of the versions of it. There's a couple of different ones. I took the one that seems to me the fullest and most interesting. Then I've got the Gospel of Mary, which is apparently to say Mary Magdalene, which is one of the Nag Hammadi texts. That, as you know, if you've looked it up, is filled with holes, if you can even use a weird metaphor like that. And now they know how many holes it takes to fill the Gospel of Mary. Well, I decided to reconstruct that hypothetically as well, which is very easy to do because one part of it summarizes what's missing. And so, anyway, then I've got Melchizedek, an apocalypse from Nag Hammadi, which sort of fits with Hebrews. And let's see, there's the Apocalypse of Peter, which tells about the horrors awaiting the damned, so I figured I might as well get a head start. And then I've got some epistles, the Epistle to the Laodiceans, which is an old Latin text, very short ones, trying to fill the gap mentioned by the epistle Paul wrote to Laodicea, mentioned in Colossians but not included in the New Testament. Got 3 Corinthians, which is was usually circulated with the Acts of Paul. I have the Acts of Paul and Thecla, kind of an independent unit within the gospel, the Acts of Paul. Got the Preaching of John, which is also a unit circulated in the larger Acts of John, but has its own integrity. It's a docetic, Gnostic reminiscence of John the disciple as to how Jesus both was and wasn't there. And let's see, there's the Mandean Book of John, about John the Baptist and his encounter with Jesus, Jesus being a false prophet in the Mandean faith. I have a kind of composite version of the Toledoth Yeshu, the Jewish anti-gospel tradition, where Jesus is a bastard and a sorcerer and a false prophet. And there's the Revelation of Dositheus, otherwise known as the Stellae of Seth from the Nag Hammadi texts. Then there's the reconstruction of the Great Declaration of Simon Magus, most of which is preserved in one of the church fathers. And so I tried to cover the sectarian milieu from which Jesus emerges, with the Palestinian baptizing Gnostic milieu. So we've got Simon Magus, John the Baptist, Dositheus, and so forth. There is the Epistle on Works Righteousness from Nag Hammadi, which Robert Eisenman argues is the original of the decree of the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15, as well as probably the original of the Epistle of Jesus to Agbar, king of Edessa, which I also include. And there's just all kinds of stuff in there. The Preaching of Peter, taken from the Pseudo-Clementines. And what I've tried to do is to give an inclusive canon. I've tried to create not just a source book of early Christianity and heresy, but rather, suppose they had tried to issue a representative volume that could function as scripture for a pluralistic church. This is, given what fragments we have left, and some are pretty substantial, then this is how it might look. Had they not burned various texts, we would have an even more representative one, but still, it's not bad. I also have translated them. I've made different text critical choices than some translators have, and my introductions are ultra radical, as you might expect. I, for instance, explain in the case of each Pauline epistle what the occasion and point would be if it were genuinely Pauline, but then I explain why it is probably not, and then what led to it under that understanding. And footnotes indicate what is probably an interpolation and what is aimed at what else, and so forth. So I believe it's significantly different even from these excellent books, the Gnostic Bible, the Other Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bibles. There are a lot of great collections of non-canonical material out there, and if you can save up your milk money to get them all, do it. But I think mine is unique in its approach as well as its content. So supposed to be out in April. And let's see, Agnostic Gabe from Miami wants to know about the name Elohim. In fact, I got a couple of questions about this. Gabe says, I guess he's the agnostic archangel Gabriel. He says, I have read that the name Elohim actually is plural and translates to shining ones in Hebrew. I've also read that Yahweh or Yahweh is but one of the Elohim. Is this not proof that Christianity evolved out of a polytheistic religion? Well, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that's true. I agree with you completely. Elohim is plural, and by itself, that would at least imply polytheism, though it doesn't demand it, since there is precedent for kings and the like to have plural endings on their names and such to indicate a fullness of power. That, I think, is not completely a harmonistic gimmick by conservatives. But and also I think what I have read is that Elohim means strong ones, which is why in some passages you can't tell whether there is a reference to God or not, such as in Genesis 1, where it says that either the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep, or a mighty wind, because ruach can mean either spirit or wind, and Elohim again can mean God or something strong, and so it's hard to tell. But Elohim is certainly used both to simply be God and gods, and you have to try to figure out which it is in the context of the Old Testament. And as for Yahweh being one of the Elohim, well, that seems pretty darn clear from a passage in Deuteronomy, one of the just...
You're not recording. Stop, you can go back to it.
Perhaps I didn't know to do this somehow. So, okay. Back to Winamp. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, yeah. That's yeah, I see the oscilloscopic thing, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, great. Well,
there was an email instruction.
So we're back. The control voice is back, leading you into the outer limits again. Sorry about that glitch, but the recorded version of the show will have the half hour of erudite gibberish that you've missed up to now. We were discussing the passage in Deuteronomy, which certainly supports the questioner's assertion that the Elohim business of having a plural ending for the name of God implies the evolution of Old Testament religion from polytheism. And the smoking gun here is in Deuteronomy chapter 32, where we have a long verse section. Most of Deuteronomy is just rather flat prose, but we get into an old section grafted in chapter 32. And so you don't want to read the whole darn thing, but for instance it says in verse 7, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When Elyon, or as they usually have in English, the Most High, gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he fixed the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, and the sons of Elohim. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him, he kept him as the apple of his eye, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. Yahweh alone did lead him, and there was no foreign god with him," etc. Well, you see, it's saying, okay, right from the beginning, Yahweh was there with his people, and how did they get to be his people? Quite simply, when Elyon, the highest of the gods, the father of the gods, because the others are said to be his sons, the sons of God, when he was creating the human race, he decided, well, how many nations are we to have? Let me divide them up so that each one of my sons, the lesser deities, will each have a country, a nation to rule. And then he parceled them out, and Yahweh claimed Jacob, or Israel, as his heritage. And so there were many gods, and the shocking thing is that in this stage of belief, Yahweh or Jehovah was not even the highest God. Now, what is going on there? Well, actually, it's no surprise the evolution of theism in ancient Israel is traced by Margaret Barker and by Mark Smith and some others, but I'm a big Barker fan. In her book, The Great Angel, A Study in Israel's Second God, she traces it in this fashion, and this is not considered some sort of eccentric theory. She says that there were these various gods, and the young warrior god Yahweh eventually became king of gods, the same way Marduk did in Babylonian religion, the same way that Baal did in Canaanite religion, and the same way that Indra did in Vedic religion, and so on and so on and so on. Even Zeus, same basic thing. And what happened? The older generation of gods were cringing in fear at the menace offered by a dragon or dragons. There was no human race yet. There wasn't even a world as we know it. And that too is part of the story, because a young warrior god steps up and says, I will overwhelm this monster that the rest of you fear on one condition: if you make me king of the gods when I do it. And so the old king, whether it's Ea or El or Elyon, etc., says, all right, or Varuna says, all right, you'll deserve it if you could do that. And so he goes into battle, and he defeats the dragon, who in Babylon is called, again, there's more than one, Tiamat and Apsu. In Canaanite religion, it's Lotan. In the Bible, it's Leviathan or Behemoth, or Rahab. There's a bunch of names for them. They're even described. It's even described in the Bible as a seven-headed dragon. And Yahweh enters into battle and either kills the dragons, or tames them as pets, or serves them up at a banquet. There's various versions of this, as there are with all ancient myths. But in the one where he kills them, he then constructs the earth out of their carcasses. And that's just what happens in the other creation accounts, the other creation myths. And so henceforth, Yahweh displaces his father and becomes king of all the gods, just as Indra, by killing the dragon Vritra, takes over from Varuna and becomes the new king of the gods. And Baal at least rules alongside of El, and so on and so forth. And the myth pattern is consistent all over the ancient world. And it's pretty obvious that it represents a generational succession of priesthoods and an evolution in the religion. We have scenes in which God, Yahweh, destroys the other gods, various places in the Bible. There are a number of stories and you might say sidelong references to this, but my favorites are in the Psalms. The Psalms are always going to be the repository of some of the very oldest of Israelite belief, because people don't give up the wording of their hymns. I mean, you can debate and change a lot else, but people don't like their hymn books changed, even today, when the Methodists are fighting over whether you ought to have Onward Christian Soldiers in the hymn book and so on. Well, for instance, in Psalm 74, it, again, a long thing, but it's in the midst of national crisis, and they're appealing to God to save them. God is a warrior and all that. Well, so they remind him of that in Psalm 74, verse 12. Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy might. Thou didst break the heads of the dragons on the waters. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Thou didst give him his food for the creatures of the wilderness. Thou didst cleave open springs and brooks. Thou didst dry up ever-flowing streams. Thine is the day, thine also the night. Thou hast established the luminaries and the sun. Thou hast fixed all the bounds of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. Remember this, O Yahweh, how the enemy scoffs and an impious people reviles thy name. Do not deliver the soul of thy dove to the wild beasts. Do not forget the life of thy poor forever. Have regard for thy covenant, and so forth. What's all that about? Well, before I knew about the myth of the dragon, I had no idea. It sounded like just a bunch of weird fragments pasted together, but once you understand the underlying myth, it makes all kinds of sense. You notice in this passage there are three concerns. God is king, God has defeated the dragons, God has created the animals and the earth. Well, that's because all three fit together. He destroyed the dragon Leviathan with its heads in the sea. He made it into the creation, and by doing so, he founded his throne. So that's Psalm 74. Another goodie is Psalm 89, which is, if anything, even more explicit. Just start at the beginning of this one. I will sing of thy steadfast love, O Yahweh, forever. With my mouth I will proclaim thy faithfulness to all generations. For thy steadfast love was established forever. Thy faithfulness is firm as the heavens. That's because it's a solid dome, right? The firmament. Thou hast said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your descendants forever and build your throne for all generations. Okay, so we've got God's promise to the Davidic monarch. And now we're going to get into God's greatness, because the Davidic king is God's vicar on earth, his earthly stand-in. Verse 5, let the heavens praise thy wonders, O Yahweh, thy faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the sons of Elohim is like Yahweh, a God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and terrible above all that are round about him? O Yahweh, God of the armies, who is mighty as thou art, O Yahweh, with thy faithfulness about thee? Thou dost rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, thou stillest them. Thou didst crush Rahab like a carcass. Thou didst scatter thy enemies with thy mighty arm. The heavens are thine, the earth also is thine, the world and all that is in it thou hast founded them. The north and the south thou hast created them. Mounts Tabor and Hermon joyously praise thy name. Thou hast a mighty arm, strong as thy hand, high thy right hand. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of thy throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before thee. Blessed are the people who know the festal shout, who walk, O Yahweh, in the light of thy countenance, etc. What is all this about? Well, again, this is sung at a festival of the renewal of the monarchy, in which the Davidic king plays the role of Yahweh when he became king of the gods. He founded his throne on righteousness and justice. He created the directions of the compass. He created the heavens, the earth, the creatures in it, the mountains, etc. And he did this coincident with crushing the dragon. So these themes fit together perfectly, and there's other places in the Bible too, in Job, Isaiah, and so forth, that refer to God spearing the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, and so forth. Well, so this was a polytheistic religion. We even have the scene in which, having destroyed the sea monsters, Yahweh takes his throne alongside El Elyon. Now, where might that be? Well, I bet you can guess. It's Daniel chapter 7, though, where it says, one like a son of man comes after the appearance in succession of various monsters from the deep. And then he sits down next to one who has a white beard and hair, one who is ancient in days, in other words, an old superannuated deity, who now yields the throne to the young warrior god, the same one we read about about in Exodus. Yahweh, Yahweh, a mighty man of war, etc. So once you know how to put these hints together, and there are many more, there's a lot of stuff that just was stamped out of institutional Judaism long ago, you begin to see, they tried to obscure it, but monotheism probably emerged only during or right before the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE with Jeremiah and the second Isaiah, and even then it was hardly unopposed. But before then, we don't even see it. We see a movement toward the tribal confederation that worshipped one central federal god, not excluding the gods of local shrines or the gods and totem animals of the individual tribes. We see in the time of Elijah and Elisha what is sometimes called monolatry. By that time they thought that Israel should be worshiping only the God who had brought them into the promised land, not the other gods, though that didn't mean they didn't exist. It's just as it says in the preamble to the Ten Commandments. It says, I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the house of bondage. You will have no other God but me. That doesn't mean there isn't any other God. It just says that they owe their existence to Yahweh, and therefore it would be cheating to worship another God. It's only in 2nd Isaiah that you have ringing declarations of monotheism. I am Yahweh. Beside me there is no God. Right? You could have said that pretty easily back there in the Ten Commandments if that's what you wanted to have said. Right? So they didn't. They weren't monotheists yet. And even in the war against the Seleucid Syrians in the time of Judah Maccabee, there wasn't consistent monotheism. In 2nd Maccabees, we're told that some of the heroes of Israel went out to fight the pagans wearing protective medallions of the gods of Jaffa, Semitic gods. So, Margaret Barker's theory that even early Christianity is not monotheistic, but that though these various earlier notions were banned, that didn't mean people stopped believing in them. And she says that she thinks the early Christians understood Jesus to be Yahweh, Jehovah, had come to earth as he had come to earth in angelic and human form in the Old Testament, and that when he spoke to and of his heavenly Father, he meant El Elyon. Fascinating stuff, really very interesting. Even the Hellenistic business of the dying and rising God, which by now you know I advocate as one of the sources of Jesus mythology. You don't really have to go outside of ancient Israel to find that, because you already had Baal and Tammuz and so forth as gods worshipped in Israel, gods who died and rose from the dead annually. But even Yahweh, even he appears to have been a dying and rising God. The evidence for this is not clear, but he certainly follows the prototype of the Marduk myth otherwise, and Marduk was slain by Tiamat before he rose and eviscerated him. And this is the only viable way, I think, of explaining the ritual cry in the enthronement psalms, where it says, Yahweh lives, let the earth rejoice. What do they mean? Well, it sounds just like what we say on Easter. The Lord is risen. He is risen indeed. So I'm kind of coming around to the idea that even Yahweh was a dead and resurrected God. There's a lot locked away in the Old Testament that changes the picture that we're familiar with, amazingly so. Let's see what else. Here's a sort of a big one from Achilles. Can you please explain to me the Essene documents at Khirbet Qumran in Palestine? Of what significance are these documents? Is it legitimate to claim that Jesus never existed by citing these documents? Well, these documents are found in 1947, I believe it was, in the caves at Qumran, quite by accident. There was a bunch of earthenware jars that had scrolls and fragments of scrolls that must have been the library of somebody in first century Palestine. It's still thought by many people that it was the library of an Essene monastery on the site there, and that these monks fought against Rome in the war of in 70 CE and died, having stored away their library in nearby caves. But nowadays, some scholars following Norman Gold are beginning to think that perhaps these documents were the library of the high priest or the Jerusalem temple, and that they, along with the treasures of the temple, had been taken away before the siege and hidden all over the place. In fact, over the centuries, we read about how various people, including the David ben Anan, the founder of the Karaite sect, and various people in the time of Origen, had found other stashes of the same kind of documents. So this may have been the biggest, but it wasn't the only one of these. And they may represent Essenes, the monastic celibate communal sect that lived in the Judean desert that we're told about by ancient writers, including Pliny the Elder, Philo of Alexandria, and Josephus. But then again, the place was swarming with the competing sects, and it might have been somebody else. It's the Zealots, or the Essenes and the Zealots might have been different branches of the same group. It's hard to tell. But nonetheless, they do tell us a lot about ancient sectarian Judaism from a couple of centuries before Jesus to some decades after. There might well you might well look for references to Jesus in these texts, but no such name appears. And since the scrolls, by the way, contain copies of most of what we call the Old Testament books, and copies of other works we already had, like First Enoch, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, the Book of Jubilees, etc. But it also has a lot of books, the Rules of the Sect, the Manual of Discipline, the Damascus Covenant, various hymn books they used, and liturgical directions for a messianic supper. It tells us a lot of interesting things. They expected that Melchizedek would return as a kind of a divine epiphany to destroy the wicked. They had a battle plan for Armageddon, which they intended to participate in. Really interesting stuff. But there are no personal names given, and it's all in Book of Daniel style apocalyptic ciphers, so that we read of characters like the wicked priest, the spouter of lies. Those two may be the same person or different villains. We read about how one or both ambushed the teacher of righteousness, who was the almost messianic teacher of the sect, and how, however, he would one day have revenge and he might come again, and so on. It's fascinating, and it's hard to sort it all out. And since this must have been some major group, scholars for a long time have tried to guess which major figures they're talking about. And so irresistibly, some have always said, could the teacher of righteousness have been Jesus? Some have thought that, but more scholars have thought that it was John the Baptist or James the Just, in which case the Qumran sect would have been the early Jewish Christians. That's what Robert Eisenman says today, and I kind of tend to favor that theory. Others have just said, look, we don't know who it was. It was just some other group. Maybe it was the Essenes. And there's certainly no way to be sure. Barbara Thiering thinks that the teacher of righteousness was John the Baptist, and that the wicked priest, from John's strict standpoint, was Jesus, who was trying to liberalize the covenant and allow laymen and Gentiles to participate. And her view is quite compelling too. It's almost an embarrassment of riches. Now, why the scrolls would lead anyone to think Jesus didn't exist, I suppose, though I guess I haven't heard that theory, I suppose it's because since he doesn't appear by name, and if he was a big name character, wouldn't you think he would? And that is a good point, but the problem is whoever they're talking about as a major teacher is not named. So it could be Jesus or John or James, and you couldn't really be sure. So they're very potentially powerful evidence, but it's just hard to agree on what direction they're pointing in. So the Dead Sea Scrolls repay a lot of study, and having studied them some, I wish I could be a little more definite about it. But what a pain. That's often the case with scholarly scrutiny. You go into it trying to find answers, and you wind up, when you know it, with more questions than you started out with. What a pain. But that's certainly one of them. Let me see what I've got in the way of some more questions here that I've from my site. There should be, let's see here, quite a bunch more. Someone also asked about the names of God and the reticence in ancient Israel to use the name of God. You know, what was going on there? Why did they famously refrain from using the divine name Yahweh even in liturgical readings where the Hebrew text had it in front of them, right? Why did they do that? Well, one questioner says, could it be that they were trying to hide the fact that there had been different Hebrew gods, as denoted by the plethora of names, and they thought they could just, a la Orwell's Newspeak, try to make it impossible to think in terms of many gods by just, masking them. Well, I think that is half correct, because it doesn't occur to you that there were many gods if you just say God all the time. All the more since God could be a kind of generic term as it is in English, right? Which God you're talking about. But I do think that, as I've explained already, that Yahweh and El Elyon were different gods, and it could easily be that El Shaddai and some of the other names were different gods too. It's difficult to tell. For one reason, it's hard to tell when, in the history of religion, you have a god worshipped by two different groups who do not initially know that there is another group worshiping their deity. And if they come together, what should they conclude? That they are worshiping the same God, or two different gods with the same title? It could well be that it's the same God, and that they just didn't know. They had forgotten about a related group that way back at the time of their ancestors worshipped the same deity. And so they may come back together as long separated co-religionists. Something like that happens whenever Christians discover that Muslims are worshiping the God of the Bible, that Allah is just a different spelling of Elohim, or Elohas in singular. Allah just means Al-Ilah, the God. So, sometimes people who thought they worshiped different gods turned out to be worshiping one. I think in Genesis 14, though, where Abraham meets Melchizedek, and Abraham is speaking of Yahweh, and Melchizedek blesses him in the name of El Elyon, and at the end of it, Abraham is speaking in terms of Yahweh El Elyon. What we have is a priestly story meant to reinforce among the populace that from now on El Elyon and Yahweh were supposed to be the same, whereas they had been separate, the one the father of the other. But I think that is how they tried to streamline the pantheon. The reticence about using the divine name has a different origin. That goes back to the commandment, you shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, for Yahweh will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Well, what did it mean to take the name of Yahweh in vain? How would you do that? It'd be sort of important to know, one would think, so that one could avoid doing it, right? So how do you do it? How do you not do it? And it seems in context to modern scholars that what is at stake there is both perjury and breach of contract, which are almost the same thing in certain settings. Because if you look at the actual instances of people taking the name of Yahweh, what are they doing? Well, there's a couple of blocks of texts there where you have people on oath. The defendant comes to the stand, and the judge will say, "Give glory to Yahweh," or in the New Testament they'll say, "Give glory to God" at one point, I believe in John chapter 9. And why do they do that? Well, they're saying that what you're saying you're about to say to the ear of God, and you better not lie. So give glory to Yahweh. Well, implicitly, your whatever you say is going to be taking the name of Yahweh as witness to the truth of what you're saying. And indeed, you might use the formula, "As Yahweh lives, so-and-so is true. I didn't steal so-and-so's camel." So in both cases, what have you done? You've taken the name of Yahweh. Suppose, however, you did steal that camel. You've taken the name Yahweh in vain. As it says in one of the Sufi sayings of Jesus, one of the worst sins men commit is to say, "God knoweth a thing," when in fact he does not know it. In other words, he doesn't know it because it's not true. And you're saying, "Oh, God knows it is." Hey, watch it. If it were true, he would know it, but it isn't, so he doesn't. So if you, again, said, you and I are entering into a business contract, and look, I am attesting that I'm going to be able to get the job done in so-and-so time, and it's going to cost this much, as Yahweh lives. Well, all right. That ought to do it. But if I don't intend to do that, and I'm just going to take the money and abscond, or if I just fail to do it and say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I just couldn't do it. Goodbye," and I don't propose to reimburse you, I'm taking the name of Yahweh in vain. And so it looks at least that would be taking the name of Yahweh in vain. But we're not that sure, and even all those thousands of years ago, they weren't that sure. They thought it might have to do with using the name of Yahweh as a magical invocation, as Jesus does in the Toledoth Yeshu, where he learns the divine name and is able to do miracles with it and so on. So the ancient rabbis said, tell you what, as they did with many questions, they said, let's build a defensive wall, a hedge around the Torah. Let's protect the actual written commandments by erecting a kind of an obstacle course of other ancillary commandments, so that if you don't break those, you're never going to get within breaking distance of the actual written commandments, because we're not quite sure in some cases of what they constitute. I used to go to a Baptist church when I was in junior high, where they felt this way about movies. They didn't want us uncorrupted little angels to go see, God forbid, a movie with nudity in it, right? And so what they do, they said, well, we can't leave it up to the little idiots to decide for themselves, so we'll just have to say you can't go to any movies. Well, they didn't think that going to see Bambi was going to do your soul irreparable harm. They didn't think you're going to become a hell spawn if you went to see The Sound of Music. Right? No, their point was, if they don't go to see The Sound of Music, there's no way in hell they're going to see Deep Throat. And so that was the point. They built a hedge around the Torah. Well, the ancient rabbis did the same. They said, it says not to work on the Sabbath. Well, gee, what does that mean? Does that mean you couldn't engage in some work for recreational purposes, building a new den or something? I mean, is it only trying to proscribe working for a living? What do we do? I mean, this is the Word of God. We don't want to take any chances. And so they wound up with very strange rules, like you can't throw dishwater out the window on the Sabbath because there might be seeds in the ground below, and you would have watered them, though not by intent, and you would have been farming. I mean, they knew this was going to extremes, and it sounded kind of ridiculous. They said, that's all right. If we can get people to be this careful, there's no way they're actually going to break the commandments. Well, same thing with the name of Yahweh. We're not sure what would constitute taking it in vain, so let's play it safe. we know we're on safe ground if we say only the high priest of Israel can say it, and only once a year on Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement when he goes into the Holy of Holies, he can repeat the divine name Yahweh. But the rest of you better not do it. Tell you the truth, I don't know what would happen if you did. I can't really imagine that Monty Python's Life of Brian is correct, that you'd get killed, stoned to death for just saying, this halibut is good enough for Jehovah. You're only making it worse for yourself. Right? That's a little tough to imagine, but nonetheless, it would be considered profane to perhaps soil that sacred name with your unclean lips. So that's probably why they wouldn't do it. Bill Wines from Michigan says, a few weeks back you mentioned Morton Smith's work on the secret gospel of Mark having been exposed as a hoax. I always liked Smith's approach to the Jesus of history. Now that it seems to me that the whole of his work in this area is totally discredited thanks to this hoax. You said you admired the guy in some sense, or was I hearing things? To me, when a supposedly serious scholar perpetrates a fraud such as this seems to be, there's nothing especially admirable about it. Please clarify, O Geekish One. I'm happy to do so. Smith was very careful. He didn't base his theories of the historical Jesus on the secret gospel of Mark. In the one book, his popular shorter book on the secret gospel, he does kind of spin out some hints in it about a Gnostic Jesus initiating people into visionary experience. But when you look at his book that just is on Jesus the magician, it really has not one thing to do with the secret gospel. He doesn't base anything on it, and I think it's because he knew the thing was a fake, and that if it did, and he didn't want to. He wasn't like Rhine, the guy down at Duke with the parapsychology lab, who was faking data so that he could prove his point. Smith didn't do that. He was doing this hoax to keep people on their toes, and I have to admit, I just admire the cleverness of it and the chutzpah. But his own view of Jesus as a magician, I think, is pretty good. It may be part of the truth about the historical Jesus if there was one. Because the Gospels certainly do show him using magical techniques of healing, spreading the clay on the eyes of the blind and washing it off and all that stuff. That he casts out demons. I mean, yeah, Smith's got a point. And I have some doubts about some of the parallels he brings forth from ancient magical handbooks from the Hellenistic world, but even those doubts have nothing to do with the secret gospel. So I think he kind of got mischievous at one point doing this hoax, but his serious work on the historical Jesus and Old Testament sectarianism and various other things, his work on the Mishnah, there's a huge debate over that. Jacob Neusner, who of course is the world authority on Judaism, he was a student of Smith's at one point, but broke with him eventually and said Smith just really did not understand the Jewish material he worked with. And my assumption is that Neusner is correct. He's just the guy's omniscient, but I'm in no position to evaluate that debate other than that. But where I think I can evaluate it with the Jesus the magician and so on, if that view appeals to you, that more power to you. That is not dependent on the hoax. A very good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Chuggy R. from East Yorkshire asks, in your book, The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, you say that biblical leprosy is not Hansen's disease, but just eczema or psoriasis. How do you know this? Without meaning to sound like a jerk or just to cover my butt, I believe that's just common knowledge in commentaries now, that partly based on the history of the diagnosis of Hansen's disease, that before it was given that name, it was just lumped in with all sorts of eruptive skin diseases, and that once Hansen discovered what caused this, one might say, this kind of leprosy, where you're in effect you lose all feeling in your extremities, your fingers, your nose, or whatever, and you start losing them, then they gave it that name because what was going on there was not happening in the case of what we now call eczema and psoriasis. The New Testament stories, as well as the Levitical laws, seem to be dealing with something other than Hansen's disease because of the relative ease with which they suppose you can get over it. You can be certified by, it's analogous to mold in your house and so on, that in Leviticus, that too has to be certified by a priest that you have it and then that you don't. And it seems like that's where you wouldn't be off in a leper colony if you had psoriasis. And so it appears that just a scrutiny of what separates Hansen's disease from the rest and how they dealt with the others imply that isn't what they were talking about. That's why in my translation I have Jesus healing people with skin diseases and don't bring in the leprosy thing at all. There's to show you the contrast, maybe, there is a Buddhist story about the Venerable Pindola, a famous ascetic Theravada monk who was begging, as they all did, as Jesus' disciples did too, and he was going house to house, and they would, with a begging bowl, and you'd be grateful for whatever was put in it. Well, Pindola goes up to some Hansen's disease sufferer, shall we say, and the poor guy's thumb falls off into the bowl, and to show that he did not draw distinctions in this world of samsara, Pindola ate the thumb. Well, good digesting to you, my friend. Someone else complains about the title, The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, saying that he didn't know who I was, didn't know what the book was about, but for a year or so he saw this book and said, what the heck is this? And didn't buy it. Well, of course, the title is just flippant and smartass and borrows from the great Richard Matheson story, The Incredible Shrinking Man. The movie of the same name was based on the James Franciscus. And my point in using that title is that the Son of Man, the figure of the Gospels, is shrinking and shrinking the more critically we look at his story and the evidence, because it appears that there is less and less basis for positing the historical existence of such a figure. And so I found the title irresistible, and I just love these crazy titles. I'm working on a book on Paul, the Amazing Colossal Apostle, obviously based on the Amazing Colossal Man. Someone asks when that book is coming out. Well, I'm probably counting my chickens before they hatch, because I believe Prometheus will eventually publish that book, but I don't have a contract with them yet, just because I have various other books in the works with them. My next one is my Da Vinci Fraud book came out recently, and shortly my book, The Reason-Driven Life, is coming out from them, and so I can't really hit them with a whole log jam of books all at once. But I rather expect that they will, or as Ronald Reagan would say, I'm cautiously optimistic that they'll put that out eventually. And it's going to have a scrutiny of the various letters and major reasons to think Paul didn't write them. A scrutiny of the legend of Paul's conversion and its literary sources, and how Paul, the historical Paul, is probably the same person as Simon Magus, but that the letters of Paul are Gnostic and Marcionite works, and so forth. So I want to get into a lot of that stuff. I have the book outlined, and I'm eager to write it up. Let's see. Someone asks about Gnosticism. Mike from Orlando says that he's fascinated with it and wonders if I could devote a whole show to the subject. I wouldn't mind doing that. Maybe I'll do that next time, at least the first major part of it, and then maybe we'll get some questions, and if anyone wants to talk about anything else, we can do that too. But Gnosticism is endlessly interesting, and I can talk endlessly about it, and that's the dangerous part. But I will next time try to do a double-barreled thing on Gnosticism and what's important about it. There's a lot of interesting debated questions today. Was there even such a thing as Gnosticism, and so on. I've got pages with more questions here. It's astonishing, but I'm really beginning to wonder if I'm going senile like Methuselah, and I wonder how lucid that guy was at 969 years. Just, if you think that's bad, what about the guy's birthday cakes? But I may have done this one before. It's a strange thing, but Gene from Mount Airy, North Carolina, otherwise known as Mayberry, says, presumably, inerrantists believe that the Tower of Babel was destroyed to put mankind in its place. That being said, what responses do apologists give for the International Space Station and all these other human accomplishments which would make the Tower of Babel pale in comparison? Well, I remember my astonishment in my days of tentatively exploring neo-evangelicalism, the idea that the Bible might be theologically infallible but wrong on anything else. And I was taking some courses at Wheaton College and asked this guy who was one of these lovable eccentrics, it seemed like he was from another century, he was a grad student there, I said, what do you think of the Tower of Babel? I mean, this guy knew all about ancient languages. And he said, well, it's a nice myth. Oh boy, I thought the secret police were going to come fanning out across the cafeteria and lock him up. But of course, he knew enough about how languages slowly evolved from one another to say that you simply could not have the various languages spring full blown from a miracle, and he knew that story wasn't right. But this angle, which is even more interesting, that this confusion of languages was a gimmick, a monkey wrench thrown into the works of human progress by a peevish deity who wanted to keep us in the dark. Well, yeah, that is certainly the point of that story. I remember the weekend back in July of, was it 69, when we were just about to get to the moon and the Apollo rocket had launched, and they were interviewing people all over the world, and there was a bunch of fundamentalists that said, that rocket will never get there, by gum, because God will sweep it out of the sky. And why? Where'd they get this bulletin? Well, because the Bible says the heavens are the Lord's, the earth He has given to the sons of men. Not the heavens, just the earth. And so if we get up there poaching on His real estate, well, He's not going to let that happen. I guess they had to go back to the drawing board pretty fast a couple of days later when we got there, and Neil Armstrong said, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And even more historically, Walter Cronkite said, hot dog, hot dog. I'll never forget that. I hope they had the brains to follow it up with an Oscar Mayer commercial. But, what did they say then? Well, I'm tempted to think these people joined the brigade of those who said that the moon landing took place in New Mexico, and that it never really happened. I don't know, though. But that was Tower of Babel thinking. That was exactly what that passage is about. I've always thought, boy, what a great passage to illustrate what Feuerbach says about religion. That as human beings, we have godlike potential, but we're afraid of it, and we're lazy. We don't want to actualize this potential, and we're afraid of what's going to happen if we try. And so we're only too happy to have somebody tell us in the name of God, look, you're not really supposed to grab the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Why don't you just leave that to us? Oh, sure. Father, anything you say. And then Feuerbach said, no. You've got to step up to the bat. You've got to shoulder the burden of your own God-like grace greatness. Stop clipping your wings and making the human race such a herd of cringing cowards. That means that Tower of Babel story is just the Class A example of priestcraft, and the moon landing, therefore, is just the classic example of the opposite. It shows that human beings are gods, that what once was itself a god, the moon, is now a piece of real estate with human footprints on it. An astounding thing, the greatest event in the history of the human race, which I'm mighty lucky to have been alive to see. I don't know what they're saying now, the Tower of Babel fans. Gene adds, as I am seeking a job teaching English as a second language, shouldn't my Jehovah's Witness relatives be reprimanding me for deconfounding the languages? Well, actually, I guess they figure that God's willing to let bygones be bygones, because as some interpret the Pentecost story, it's a kind of a symbolic reversal of the Tower of Babel, because now God is just concerned to get the gospel out to people, and so he's happy to have Bible translators and stuff like that. So it's just merely a tactic, the ultra secret that God once used, but he doesn't really need to anymore. Mr. Skeptic from San Diego says, when Paul spoke of his infirmity, the famous thorn in the flesh, was he referring to his self-castration? Well, that would be a considerable thorn in the flesh, but I don't believe there's any evidence that Paul dealt so radically with the stirrings of lust. There was a rumor about in the early church that Origen, the theologian of Alexandria, later considered to be a heretic, had heeded quite literally that injunction in Matthew, was it 19, that some are born eunuchs, some are made eunuchs by men, and some make themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. What is that all about? Well, certainly it means celibacy. It's a recommendation of celibacy that is being ascribed to Jesus here. Did he mean, or whoever wrote this, did they actually mean castration? Well, they could have. After all, there was the Attis religion, the savior who in grief for having 2 times the goddess he was dating, who then showed up at his wedding, and he in grief castrated himself and bled to death, and she raised him from the dead. There were people who in his honor, in a frenzy of worship, castrated themselves and threw the genitalia into the lap of a silver statue of the goddess. So it certainly wasn't unthinkable. But it's hard to know, really, what they mean. Eunuch is incapable of sex, or just no longer indulging in it. But I don't believe that's ever been suggested of Paul. If anything, the Pauline letters give evidence only of Paul having eye trouble. In Galatians, he mentions some kind of ailment that might well have disgusted the Galatians, but to their credit did not. And then he goes on to say, I testify of you that if you could have, you would have given me your own eyes. So I assume that was the problem, if it was a lingering illness. But my theory is that the thorn in the flesh was actually an assault by an angel of Satan during a visionary journey that is ascribed to Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 10. Whether this is a record of what happened to Paul or merely one of many apocalypses about an ancient figure, I don't know, but I think that is what is being said, that he was in the third heaven gaining revelations that no human speech could capture, and that he was in danger of becoming elated and inflated in his ego. And because of this, being in the very presence of God, in which no flesh shall boast, God sent an angel of Satan, that is a punishing agent, to pummel him, to humble him. It seems to me clear that is what is being stated. So I don't think that he is talking about a chronic problem on earth. Closest to this theory I know of is what Bishop Spong says in his book Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, where he suggests that Paul was gay and that his constant struggle against it was what he's talking about. But I don't think that case holds together very well. Though it's a very, very clever essay, I'm unconvinced on that one. Let's see. It's hard to know which. What about talking about my buddy Marcy? Oh, I love this guy. Richard Spencer from Atlanta says that, he says it's claimed that the narrative. Now, boy, this poses a real dilemma. Question from Atlanta, Georgia: should I do it in a Jimmy Carter accent? I've tried Maine and Australia. Well, why not? First, it is claimed that the narrative unity of Luke Acts implies they were written by a single author. This fact is used to suggest an early date for the writing of Acts, as well as refuting the claim of men like John Knox, who claim Acts was an anti-Marcionite text. So here's my questions. One, we're told that Marcion used an abbreviated form of Luke. But isn't it possible that Marcion had an earlier, perhaps the original version of Luke, and that the author of Acts was responsible for only the expansion of Luke? Well, Richard, I do think that is actually so. I think that what Marcion used as his gospel, which he did not call the Gospel of Luke, but which clearly must have been a shorter version of it. I think it was shorter than our canonical Luke. It may be, as the Church Fathers alleged, that he had trimmed away some matter theologically offensive to him from it, but I don't know if there's any real evidence. They said that, trying to explain why his gospel was shorter, period. Once you realize that is a cavil and a misrepresentation, I don't know that there's much reason to think that he cut any of it out. He did have a shorter version, but I agree with the Tübingen school and with Knox, who, as you say, makes a darn good case for this, that he just had an earlier, shorter version of what would be called Luke, whatever it was called at the time. And he may not even have known of other Gospels, and therefore may not have had an according to title on it. But it seems to me that whatever Catholic author wrote Acts padded out that Gospel to create Luke Acts. The result being that you can find considerable continuity between Luke and Acts, but that's because the continuous element has been built back into the gospel. The gospel has been retrofitted to seem to lead on to Acts, and reverse engineered. No, I guess it's not quite right, but that's what I think has happened there. More generally, approximately when do you think the book of Acts was written? Who was it written by, and what was the reason for its writing? Well, we have no definite trace of the book of Acts, Mr. President, until at the earliest, around 175, in one of Justin Martyr's writings. But even there, it's just a kind of a similarity of phraseology, and it's difficult to tell whether he's referring to Acts or just the same lingo is in the air at the time. The first reference for sure we have to there being an Acts of the Apostles is in Irenaeus, who wrote a little bit later, and so if there's no quotes from it, there's no references to it before that. It may be rather late, and that would in the middle of the 2nd century, and that would apply to the padded version of Luke as well. And we don't know the name for sure of the person that did it, but there is a very appealing theory by a friend and colleague of mine, Stefan Hermann Huller, who says that he thinks that it was Polycarp of Smyrna who wrote Acts and the pastoral epistles, which I believe are by the same author at any rate. At least 2 Timothy and Titus, I think, are written by the author of Acts, and the as Bultmann might call it, the ecclesiastical redactor of Luke's gospel. So Huller thinks that Polycarp is the author of Luke, Acts, and the pastorals as we have them. Let me just explain why this is. It's an ingenious theory. It's been suggested, I believe, by Hans von Kampenhausen and some others, that because of vocabulary similarities and other similarities, the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, are the work of Polycarp, who wrote our Epistle of Polycarp, one of the Apostolic Fathers' documents, so-called. And, if you think there's a good basis for that, if that argument sounds good to you, then there is this other argument that Jerome D. Quinn and various others have put forward, that and Stephen G. Wilson, and I find myself convinced by it, that the book of Acts and the pastoral epistles are by the same author, and some version of Luke. Well, then put them together, and as Huller does, and you wind up with Polycarp as the author of the pastorals, Acts, and the redactor of Luke. That's, unprovable, but it sounds pretty good to me. It may well be that we ought to be calling it the Gospel of Polycarp. Huller goes further in some even more radical directions, but that much of it sounds pretty good, so we might actually have a name. Might be the Gospel of Polycarp. Polycarp, who had met Marcion, we're told, and called him the firstborn of Satan, and might well have written material against him. And why would it have been written? Well, to counteract Marcionite emphasis on Paul, yet without denigrating Paul, so as to vindicate emerging Catholic Christianity and to co-opt wildly successful Marcionite Christianity, which is why you have a weird give and take in the book of Acts. Everything Paul does in terms of very specific types of improbable miracles, Peter does, and vice versa. Both preach to the Gentiles. Both believe that Christians should be free from the law, etc., etc. Peter is even the apostle of the Gentiles. It's like he's being made over in Paul's image. Paul is shown to be the great evangelist, but oddly enough, not an apostle in Acts, with one exception in chapter 14, where it's textually dubious anyway. And this sounds an awful lot like somebody is doing a balancing act trying to reconcile Catholic and Marcionite Christianity. So I think that's why Acts was written. Now here's yet another one totally out of left field. It does not follow from this one, but it's also one of Richard's questions. So hence the accent. Richard E. Friedman states in Who Wrote the Bible that the primary purpose of sacrifice in the Old Testament was not for penance, but for food. This is because the ancient Hebrews, he claims, considered life sacred, thus only a priest was allowed to take life. In light of this and any other pertinent information you may have, in what ways can the Bible be used to support the modern animal rights movements or to criticize it? Well, I don't know Friedman's arguments, what leads him to that punchline, but it doesn't seem likely to me because, according to the Book of the Covenant, an earlier stratum of Hebrew law, you could sacrifice an animal during a backyard barbecue, and in fact there was no difference between butchering an animal to eat and sacrificing it. This was before we had a centralized temple, and before people were told to sacrifice only to it and to let priests do it. So it seems to me meat eating was limited only by the amount of meat available. In all the ancient world, you had to be pretty careful about how many steaks you had because you needed that herd to keep multiplying, and most people ate porridge 3 meals a day in the Roman Empire. This probably wasn't much different. But I doubt that it's because they had the taboo that the life was in the blood, because when that does come up already in the covenant of Noah, which obviously doesn't go back to a guy named Noah after a flood, but is at least ancient Old Testament law. It says one is not to ingest blood, because the blood is the life. So we know they banned having rare steaks and Klingon blood wine and other things like that, because the life is in the blood. It did not seem to imply to them that an animal's life should be taken. Christians that are biblicists at all, I mean, who feel bound to the New Testament text, they really have their work cut out for them if they want to be animal rights people, because Jesus just speaks in a way they would never accept when he says, of how much more value is a man than a sheep. Oh, he says, you are worth more than many sparrows. God keeps his eye on them. He certainly is going to keep an eye on you. He cares for the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. Now, I suppose one could say that because that even if you say human beings are more valuable, that doesn't mean that animals are of no value and can be wantedly killed for our benefit. But you would expect that such a thing would be specified. And if there is a higher value placed on humans, what difference would that make? What meaning would it have if it didn't assume you could kill animals but not humans? What the Christian case for animal rights would have to be based on would be Ebionite traditions, early Jewish Christian traditions where Jesus did teach vegetarianism, but most scholars don't believe it's authentic. But of course, who knows, right? That's up for grabs, and that has been argued recently in a book, I believe, called The Lost Religion of Jesus. I can't lay my hand on the book at this moment, but I believe that's what it's called. I cannot think of the author. I've not yet read it. But it's an attempt to say that the Ebionites were right about Jesus. And yeah, I believe that's right. The Lost Religion of Jesus. I'm sure you could find it on Amazon, and that person probably would make a good case for it, and things I've not thought of. As they say, you can get anything out of the Bible. That isn't necessarily as nihilistic and cynical as it sounds. It's just the Bible is an old book representing a whole lot of different viewpoints, and it took so long to compile the whole thing. It's not much of a surprise that you got a lot of topics debated within it from a lot of standpoints. So yeah, you can certainly find almost anything in there. Doug from Edmonton, Alberta, says, I've friends who doubt that Satan was introduced in later translations of the Christian story, And I'd love to do a little research to show the order of translations and exactly which translation and rough timeline in which that hoser Lucifer started getting referenced as Satan. Thanks. Well, what about Satan? Actually, the issue is, as I've said a couple of times, Satan appears as the Satan, Ha-Satan, the adversary, in the book of Job, where he's one of the sons of God who meet in the heavenly council, and in the prophecy of Zechariah, where he accuses the priest Joshua of being too corrupt to wear the priestly turban, and he appears in First Chronicles, where he disputes David's devotion to Yahweh and suggests that God test him and so on. And in none of these is he a bad guy. He remains God's prosecutor and sting operations man, even in the New Testament, where he quite properly tests Jesus and Peter and so forth to see if they're up to the task. And Jesus is, Peter isn't. He's the accuser of our brethren, and he's got things to accuse us of until we take refuge in the blood of Christ and our sins are taken care of. But even there, he is no villain. The question is, when and why do we also start to find Satan is evil? And as he rarely but truly is in the New Testament, as in Paul, I think, I forget which epistle, we are not ignorant of his devices and so on. And in the book of Revelation, where Satan is identified with Leviathan, the ancient serpent, though not with the Edenic serpent, Lucifer appears in the, I believe, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of Isaiah 14, when it's satirizing the fall of the king of Babylon, using the language of the Canaanite astrological myth of Halal, the son of Shahar, that is the planet Venus, the son of the dawn goddess, the morning star. And it says, "How you are fallen, O Halal, son of Shahar." And in the Greek, it says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning." Lucifer simply means the light bearer. Right? Christopher was the saint who carried Christ across the river, according to some legend, when Jesus was an infant, and hence the the dashboard saint protecting travelers. I don't care if it rains or freezes, etc. Lucifer, the light bearer, that I do not know. I rather suspect it was not yet a title for an evil Satan, because after all, in the book of Revelation, Jesus is called Lucifer. He calls himself that. He says, "I am the bright and morning star," and the I think in the Greek it has the light bearer. There was a church father named Lucifer. I don't think that's pretty strange. If it was supposed to be a name for the devil, they had various other names like Mastema and Semyaza and so forth. But I don't know when Lucifer became a name of the devil. It isn't really used that way in the Bible. It involves a myth that is never stated in the Bible of Satan once having been an archangel. The closest the Bible comes to that is in 2 Corinthians, where Paul says that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, which of course means he isn't one, right? I don't disguise myself as what I am. And actually, it's not so much a question of when that comes into the Bible as to whether or not it does. And I don't think so. We've got another good one. Oh, this is kind of long. Maybe I should wait for another time to take a look at this multi-part question about the Gospels and so on. Norm asks, who was Zerubbabel? Historically, what happened to him? Didn't Haggai and Zechariah have specific expectations of him? Well, of course, Zerubbabel was a character on the Flintstones. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Barney Rubble. Zerubbabel was a Davidic heir, one of the royal house. He would have been on the throne of David had there been one. But this was at a time after the exile when the Persian Empire sought to gain favor with its provinces by bankrolling the reestablishment and reorganization of their ancestral religions and giving them as much autonomy as they could. And so they gave the money to Ezra and Nehemiah and the others to rebuild the temple. They didn't want people to be dissatisfied. They wanted them to be happy to be part of the Persian Empire. And so they picked an actual Davidic descendant to be the closest thing Jews could have to a king, and this was Zerubbabel. And it's true that when Haggai and Zechariah, who were contemporaries and colleagues, prophesied, this was at a time when there was a civil war in the Persian Empire, and I think someone who pretended to be the great Darius coming back was trying to take the throne. It looked like the Persian Empire might fall, and so I think it's Zechariah who has God say, I'm about to shake the throne of kingdoms. Once more I will shake the earth, and so on. And they figured, okay, this is it. It's now time for us to gain independence, as the prophet said, and Zerubbabel will be God's anointed. And so Haggai and Zechariah speak of placing the crown on him and anointing him, and Zerubbabel is their nominee for the Messiah. It didn't turn out that way, interestingly. Gilgamesh, a noble name, says, I was curious, as modern scholarship tried to apply the ideas of Nietzsche's moral theory of a master and slave morality in application of the Bible or other texts. Has it been tried? Should it be tried? Has it been falsified? It just makes sense to me when looking at the Greeks and Jews. Well, of course, Christianity, Nietzsche said, was slave morality, and you certainly can see that in it. For instance, when my favorite example would be this stuff where you're told to turn the other cheek and forgive your enemy, but don't worry, because when the Son of Man comes, he's going to kick butt, and these bastards are going to get what they deserve. Now, I can forgive you. I can be Mr. Nice Guy, but the bad cop here, he's going to give you what you deserve. That, of course, is just self-delusive hypocrisy of the very kind Nietzsche talked about. You're just gutless and afraid to take revenge and retaliate, and therefore you say, my big brother Jesus Christ is going to kick your ass, but good. That's Nietzsche's quite properly critical there. But is that all there is to Christianity? I think even Nietzsche understood that it wasn't. He didn't hold Jesus responsible for what people made of his faith. And Max Scheler, a fascinating Protestant philosopher, said that there is a Nietzschean way of interpreting the gospel ethic of non-retaliation, simply because by virtue of taking the standpoint of the Son of Man, one becomes the Superman and just shrugs off the fly stings of those who slap one on the cheek. That you cannot lower yourself to take such pathetic gestures seriously, and you cannot help but look at such people as children and have compassion. That is a Nietzschean view. I find that pretty convincing, to tell you the truth. So I think Nietzsche's critique was right on the money, but there is a Christian response to it. I don't think Christianity falls irredeemably prey to the condemnation of Nietzsche. I believe he should be viewed as a prophet, helping to purify the Christian ethic, as my old pastor Don Mars used to say when he would quote him and refer to him as Brother Nietzsche, the only Baptist in history who has. See, a guest raises the question in the chat room, why do religions such as Christianity stress so strongly the concept of belief in whatever the religious concepts are? I do not care whether or not an ant believes that I exist. Why would a God care whether or not I believe that he, she, or it exists? Well, I think the kind of enlightened humanistic view of this is to say that there is something about the human makeup, as St. Augustine says, that requires relation to a transcendent reference point, that our hearts are made to rest in God, and until they do, there will be a longing frustration. If we were made to be self-sufficient, there wouldn't be that problem. But we are made for a relationship with a loving God, and if we refuse to explore such a relationship, we will be the losers. So that it's not God who suffers, but rather us. And the comparison is drawn to heliotropism. Plants naturally turn to the sun because they need the sun's energy. It's not that the sun punishes them by making them wilt if they don't seek him out. It's the problem of humans who are made to worship. And I'm not saying I accept this, but that is at least a kind of a sensible way of viewing why humans have a need to worship and ought to worship from one standpoint. But but of course, you're right. That's not the way it's put very often in the Bible and by Christians and other believers too. They have God as a kind of a Saddam Hussein who just has to have people bowing and scraping to him so he can bask in their obsequiousness. Oh, right you are, Chief. And that is just moronic. It just results in an unworthy notion of God. Perhaps there are worthy notions of God, perhaps not, but that wouldn't be one of them. But this is an interesting idea, the idea that we might have a need for God, and even modern neurology speaks of that, how we may be kind of hardwired to seek some kind of transcendence or experience of it, which is no proof that there is such a thing, of course. But it might make Augustine's claim, Pascal's claim, worth a look. I personally get a great deal out of the experience of worship, though to me that is a very different matter as to whether philosophically there is a superhuman being. It's a whole different language game, but can't prove anything by it. But certainly can be no skin off a God's nose, whether you're indifferent to him or blaspheming him, if there is one. Achilles asks, is there any evidence that Jesus Christ was modeled after the personality of John of Gamala, the first century Jew who fought against the Roman army? Someone emailed me with this. It's a claim made in a recent book that I have not yet seen. I must confess, I'm not even familiar with John of Gamala. I know of Josephus discussing the zealot leader John of Giscala. I wonder if it's the same person. I do think that the related figure Simon Bar Giora, who had a triumphal entry into the temple, cleansing it of the lestoi, the thieves or zealots, I think that has contributed to the triumphal entry of Jesus story. I don't know about this. I'll have to get a hold of the book and let you know. The second question I've had about it, it's intriguing, and I'll have to shell out a few bucks to try to find out. I'm also asked, have you read Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwill or heard anything about it? Yeah, I gave that book a long and nasty review in Volume 11, Number 1 of the Journal of Higher Criticism, where I suggested that it's just incredible and an unbelievable way of trying to decode the Gospels. The author thinks that Christianity was invented as a kind of a joke on the poor Jews by Titus's propaganda machine, and that the father is Vespasian, the son is Titus, I think, or am I getting that the other way around? And that it really is about the conquest of Jerusalem by the Romans, and it's tricking you into worshiping Titus without knowing it, and that Josephus wrote all four Gospels and the Jewish War and Jewish Antiquities, and intended real smart folks like Atwill himself to be able to decode all of this. It just strikes me as absolutely beyond the bounds of possibility. But you can read my specific arguments in the Journal of Higher Criticism. I hope to post that review on our site for the Journal of Higher Criticism, which one can access through the Atheist Alliance website. We're sponsored by that wonderful group. They're the most forward-looking of all these groups, and I'm proud to be associated with them. So I have given it to the book. Then also I published a miniature rebuttal that Atwill sent in to, and I'm always happy to do that. Very erudite scholar. I just find the case impossible to accept, but that doesn't mean you ought not to read it. It's certainly fascinating. There are various versions of this or similar books saying that Jesus is some kind of propaganda version of Caesar Augustus or whatever, and it's not the whole idea is not out of the question. I just found Atwill's case not persuasive, but I am hardly the Pope here. I don't think it shouldn't carry a lot of weight what I may say of such things. Earlier, the part that wasn't broadcast but will be available on the archive, I invited people to check out the website of me, robertmprice.mindvendor.com, Mindvendor with an O-R. You can find a lot of reviews and old sermons and essays and articles and even horror stories by me. And you can access the questions page also, and there should be a lot to chew on there, and feel free to ask questions about any of that stuff. I also, at the beginning of the show, thanked the kind folks who have contributed to the upkeep of the old Bible Geek Fortress of Solitude here with your generous contributions, which are much appreciated, and every contribution is that of a generous soul, and much truly appreciated. I have tried to email each person to thank them. Some I've managed to get through to, but I'm having trouble getting the computer to answer, to reply to some of those. I don't know why. So it's not that I haven't wanted to contact you, and that's why I decided I would do so. I would just verbally thank you here today. And again, something else I mentioned. Think about this. I am considering the possibility of adding a second weekly show, an ongoing class on like Genesis 1 through 12, or maybe one of the Gospels, maybe the Gospel of Thomas, something like that, and we could handle it the same way with people sending in questions or calling up or whatever, and I'd love to have you do that. I'm on the Skype system now. I don't know that I've been flipping back and forth between the chat room and the questions page. I've only looked at the phone window here and don't believe I've gotten calls yet. I think I would have gotten a signal for that, but I can take the calls now, so please feel free next time to do that. And we're really in computer nirvana here, if I can just keep straight how to do this. I mean, I can barely drive my car, so it's it's asking a lot for me to do the simplest electronic things. But with the help of Reggie Finley, the great Morpheus himself, I ought to be able to handle the Matrix a bit better next time. And I might have room for one more question. Is that possible in 2 minutes? Let's just see. Oh boy, that one's a toughie. About predestination. Someone's asked about why I accept the Markan priority hypothesis. As I've mentioned recently, I am reopening the question to look at some of the other theories of synoptic relations. For instance, that Matthew might be the first gospel, Mark abbreviated it, and Luke then used both of them, or that Luke used Mark and Matthew used both of them, or that Matthew and Luke are independent somehow, but Mark used the both of them. All of those have evidence in their favor, and I want to take another look at that. But as I've done work on the Gospels for many years, again and again, it seems to make sense to me that Mark is the original, and that the differences between it and those that have used it make most sense if the secondary Gospels, Matthew and Luke, have changed Mark rather than the other way around. They seem to smooth out rough places in Mark, to domesticate controversial theology in Mark, and so forth. So if one were simply to assume it's the first, that would be an unscientific approach, but it seems as a working hypothesis to repay effort. But I think one mustn't take it for granted, and I recommend everybody else take a second look at some of these other theories as well. So that's very worthwhile. I'm also asked by this from Scotty from Austin, Texas. Is there an argument for the reality of the resurrection in the change of the disciples' behavior after the death of Jesus? Well, that's a big one, but let me leave you with that as a cliffhanger for the next time. And I'll be back with you then, and I appreciate your great input for another good show today. And if you want to hear what you missed, check it out online in the archive.